Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast championship weekend. As always, Bet the Board is powered and part of the Amazon Wondery podcast network. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, 3 football games left to go this season. Are you sad? Are you excited? Are you ready to take your vacation to the Caribbean?
All of the above. I believe that would be D. You gave me 3 options, was it?
Look at you, always that guy. Going down the Scantron test, C. I'm going all of the above. I'm going none of the above. You're not making me make decisions in any capacity here.
I absolutely knew when I was going to bomb a test or do well, and if I was going to bomb it, I was at least going to be efficient with my time.
I mean, hey, look, time is the valuable resource that you're not going to be able to get back. I do have to give one of my professors along the way credit. We had a 20-question true-false test that he gave us one year. Every answer was true, and he said nobody put true for all the 20 questions because you get into that psychology. You go, there's no possible way that all of these statements can be true, but different discussion for a different day when it comes to psychology. We won't deal with any of that here. We have 2 big games to break down, but as I always ask you to kick things off, we saw 4 games last weekend. I think some results surprised people. We saw some interesting comments from the general manager of the Buffalo Bills, but if there was one major takeaway from the 4 games you saw last Saturday and Sunday, what stood out to Payne Insider?
Good question. I think we're kind of at a point where everything we've been discussing for multiple years is coming to fruition, right? How do you win?
Throwing the football?
7 of the 8 offenses, right? 7 of the 8 offenses that were in last round were, or I should say 7 of the 8 teams were all offensive focused with offensive coaches. And this week, what do you have?
You have 4 for 4.
All 4 teams. 4 for 4. And then the other correlation is how do you build out these teams? When is your window? And 3 of the 4 quarterbacks are all on their rookie deals. And the other one, he's the anomaly. And it's because of skill set. So all of the things that we've discussed and pounded the table for is coming to fruition here. And I don't really want to slander Bills fans, but I think the way the teams are currently playing, these are the 4 best power-rated teams. And if you've listened to this podcast, whether it was from the onset of the season, I wasn't quite confident that the offense would pick up where it left off under Brian Daboll. And the reason we'll see, hopefully, him win Coach of the Year is what he's done with the quarterback position. It's not just random luck. One guy had turnover problems, and suddenly he didn't under Daboll towards the end of his stint in Buffalo, and he goes and overtakes a team in New York where its quarterback and Daniel Jones had substantial turnover problems, and they got cleaned up, and all of a sudden, the first year out of Buffalo, we have Josh Allen with turnover problems. I don't really want to hash too much because I think you know my feelings on how the league kind of handled some of the situations down the stretch and how it was just extremely favorable to the Buffalo Bills. We're changing off-season rules with overtime. We're changing, they're playing 17 games. We have, a game that gets canceled where in live wagering, the Buffalo Bills are plus 160 and somehow that allows them to host the game against the Bengals. It would have allowed them to play a neutral site game against the Chiefs. Everything was really slanting in their direction, and they were leaking so much damn oil down the stretch. Offensively, we had talked about Josh Allen having some issues throwing underneath, and we certainly outlined the defensive issues they had trending-wise. And I don't know. I think these are the right 4 teams. I think we're we're going to be in for a great weekend of games here, and we're looking at that in terms of the market telling us as such, right? Kansas City now -1, Eagles -2.5. I think if you fast forward to the Super Bowl, no matter who plays who, unless there's a glaring injury, probably going to have a spread under 3 in that game as well.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. Just look at the future odds. I mean, the favorite right now, depending on your chosen book, right around 2-1, the biggest quote-unquote long shot at 3-1. And when you look at conference championship spreads, currently 2.5 or shorter, be the third time ever that both conference titles have a spread this low. 1982 and 1997, the last time we saw a similar scenario play out. There have been only 4 conference championship games since 2000 with a spread of 2.5 or shorter. I mean, the list goes on and on for the expectations. And then layer on top of that, the 49ers and Bengals could both be underdogs on win streaks of 10-plus games. Only 5 teams since 1970 have been a playoff underdog when they enter the postseason on a 10-plus game winning streak. So many interesting factors. Obviously, a level of parity that we haven't seen, and some of that contributed to by a marquee injury, which we'll get to later in the show. We'll have Deepak, the good doc, here to offer his sentiments in terms of what we can expect from Patrick Mahomes and some of the other difference makers. But before we get to that particular game, let's start with the early slate that'll take us to Philadelphia, where it's the Eagles taking on the 49ers, and it's the Eagles a shade less than a field goal favorite, laying 2.5 pretty much across the board, some juiced out to minus $1.15. Total in the game, 46.5. Brock Purdy at 23 years of age, Jalen Hurts at 24, the first conference championship or later matchup when you have 2 starting quarterbacks under the age of 25. They've been tremendous in terms of what's been asked of them this year. You look at the Philadelphia Eagles with Jalen Hurts under center, 1 loss this season. Without him, we know that they went 0-2 in Gardner Minshew. These 2 quarterbacks, a level of familiarity with each other. I'm not taking anything away from the shootout they played when Hurts was a starter at Oklahoma and Purdy at Iowa State, but they have gone head-to-head in the past, and you're talking about the 2 teams in the NFL right now ranked number 1 and number 2 in total defense. It's the 21st NFC Championship between the top 2 seeds since the playoffs expanded back in 1990, and Kyle Shanahan Payne puts his gaudy ATS record in the postseason on the line, 7-1 ATS in his playoff career as a head coach. When you begin to dissect some of the fascinating matchups, whether it's the Eagles offensively and their ability to show balance attacking a 49ers defense that we know is a little vulnerable in the secondary, or the storyline and narrative that I see circulating maybe more than anywhere else now about Brock Purdy, and this is going to be the biggest challenge he faces going on the road into hostile territory. What do you want to see from a football perspective and the side of the ball that you focused your energies on in trying to unpack this matchup?
Well, let's start kind of where you led us in Kyle Shanahan. And I think that's ultimately what we're going to see pretty early on here. Like, what game plan does he employ? Like, this isn't playing the bad version of Dak and the Cowboys offense with one of its only 2 explosive weapons missing half the game. So you're thinking Kyle Shanahan has to be more aggressive here. And you mentioned the great ATS record, and we've kind of talked over the years just the kind of offensive mind he is. It's great game plans. It's a great scheme. It's a good script. It's great play calling. All of that. Just needs to be a better game manager. He's just not the most aggressive in spots where he should be pushing. And there was a wild quote from him this week. I don't know if you saw it, but basically a reporter asked what happened before halftime against Dallas. And Shanahan said, we liked where the score was at. And my mind is thinking, like, this is a tied game, and you were a 3.5-point favorite. How can you like the game being tied? Like, it didn't make sense to me. So aggressiveness is the one thing that's needed here, honestly, and it actually goes for both quarterbacks. You got to get out early, and certainly, you know, the narrative is we saw Purdy decline in play against the best defense he had faced, and now he's facing a very good defense, and it's in a hostile environment. But we know teams obviously are better when they get out early, but you have to get out early because whether it's Purdy or Hurts, both are bottom of the barrel metrically when trailing late in games, albeit smaller sample size because Purdy's only played, you know, since week 13. He's only started since week 14, and Hurts and the Eagles don't really trail all that often. But both quarterbacks have just performed horrifically late in games, and so it's very important to get out. But going back to Purdy specifically, San Francisco, I think, has to be better in protection. Right, we can all say Purdy wasn't good last week or the moment was too big for him because he's this rookie 7th rounder and all the stuff that comes with that. But if you looked, he was pressured on 49% of dropbacks. Very few quarterbacks are good in that situation. Dallas has been the number one pressure rate team this season, and they didn't have to blitz to get home last week, only an 18% blitz rate. So the blitzes didn't leave the secondary susceptible. You also look since week 8, you're going to see something similar here. The Eagles are number 2 in pressure rate, and they blitz at a below league average rate as well. So Kyle's got to figure out how to get the protection a little bit better, how to shore up the interior of that O-line, something we thought was a glaring weakness coming into the season for the 49ers. But I think when Purdy throws the ball, Shanahan's got to be smart here. Maybe do a little bit more of what he doesn't do. It would be really wise if Shanahan throws from shotgun a lot more. Like, it's impossible for Shanahan not to have Purdy under center and mix in some play action stuff. It's part of your offense. Purdy's been successful doing that. But we outlined this last week. You cannot consistently play action the Eagles defense. Philly is the least sensitive defense to play action. They're number 1 in EPA allowed on all play action passes. The corners, they play off frequently. The linebackers are taught to drop and not bite. The safeties don't crash down. So play action just doesn't work overly well against the Eagles relative to the rest of the league. But where Purdy's been really dynamite is where the Eagles have been more susceptible. And you look at Purdy in the shotgun. Have him get back there, be this quick point-and-click quarterback before pressure arrives. Since Week 14, when the game plans were designed specifically for Brock Purdy, early downs, first 3 quarters, 49ers are number 1 in EPA per pass using shotgun without play action. 93% of the time when Purdy is in shotgun, no play actions used. So that's got to be the path. And you look over that same stretch since Week 14, shotgun, no play action, Purdy, number 2. In EPA per pass attempt, 5th in passing success rate. And then you look at adjusted yards per pass attempt, he's number 2 there. All those metrics are among 27 qualifying quarterbacks. So this has to be how the 49ers elect to throw it, because I think the one difference between the Eagles and Cowboys, yes, they get pressure, but when the Eagles get pressure, they actually take the quarterback down. Philly's number 1 turning pressures into sacks. Obviously, this all can't be on Purdy. I think we know Shanahan has a pretty sophisticated run scheme. There are areas where you can attack the Eagles' defense in the run game. If you look over, the left guard is one of the 49ers' best areas to attack on the ground. They're actually 17% over expectation in terms of league success rate. They're 17% better than that league average rate over the left guard position. That's been an area where the Eagles are a little bit susceptible. Jet sweeps. Obviously not a ton of sample size there, but the Eagles have been susceptible to that because their ends like to get upfield. Maybe we see Debo hit an explosive on one of those end-around runs or jet sweeps. I will say this. You had me digging into this. I felt like I looked at it maybe a couple weeks ago and didn't see drastic improvement, but you were right here, Todd. The Eagles' run defense has improved. Now, the improvement has come after signing, basically the left wing of the retirement home. But what's really odd here is if you look at Sue and Linval Joseph and how they're grading out, it's actually been well below replacement level against the run. So maybe it's a little bit of a scheme thing. Maybe everyone else has stepped up a little bit, knowing they had to bring in these guys. Jordan Davis isn't really playing as many snaps, so it's not necessarily him being like this massive force. But those 3 guys together have certainly, helped this Eagles run defense be a little bit better. If you look the first 10 weeks, 28th in schedule-adjusted rush efficiency. Every game from Week 11 onward, they're 15th, the Eagles. So we have seen that improvement. Shanny's got to figure out how to win a little bit on the ground. CMC is dealing with a right calf injury. He's also got some knee tendonitis going on the left side. Elijah Mitchell's dealing with a groin. Todd, just kind of in this market, we've actually seen McCaffrey under 63.5 rushing yards come in Wednesday afternoon. It's kind of indicating the Eagles are certainly better against the run, as you indicated, but this might have to be more of a Brock Purdy passing game, as crazy as that may sound to some of the narrative-based folks who think Brock Purdy is, completely going to dwindle in play rate here based upon how he looked last week.
And we saw some of that from the 49ers, to your point. 57 yards last week for Christian McCaffrey, his fewest since Week 12, which was Jimmy Garoppolo's last game. Carried the ball 5 times for 8 yards in the first 12 plays, and then carried it a grand total of 5 times over the final 3 quarters. You look at Elijah Mitchell's role, it clearly expanded. Both players missed practice on Wednesday. 49ers say there's nothing to worry about there, but it does always prompt the question, how healthy are these guys? We know everybody is banged up, and I think what's more interesting, and of course we'll have Deepak weigh in on what he think is ailing Christian McCaffrey, is that there's a variety of people throwing out hypotheses about what he might actually be dealing with, if it's a contusion, if it's a calf strain, or if there's a variety of other things going on there. So the 49ers will know what they have in terms of their weapons, and obviously going to do everything they can to showcase them. George Kittle clearly been a huge beneficiary since Brock Purdy has taken over. When you look at how Kittle has performed, Purdy 29 of 39 for 425 yards since targeting George Kittle since week 14, tied for the most touchdowns among quarterback receiver duos during that span. The only one right there with him, Patrick Mahomes and Jerick McKinnon, who we'll get to a little bit later in the show. Now, as far as the other side of the ball, the narrative, Payne, has been about the 49ers. We know how good this team is against the run, and some of the numbers don't lie. Second fewest rushing yards per game in the NFL, including the playoffs. They hold opposing running backs to 3.3 yards per carry this season. Second fewest yards per rush allowed on options this season. Did not allow 70-plus rushing yards to any player in a game. I can go on and on about the San Francisco run defense, but we've seen the Eagles be multiple, and while they are run-heavy in terms of their run rate, this is a team that's as likely to throw for 300 yards as they are to run for 200 yards, which is a credit to Nick Sirianni and the way he schemed up their offense. If you're sitting in those meeting rooms this week for Philadelphia trying to figure out how to put Jalen Hurts in the best spot to have success against this 49ers defense, what are some of the things you're looking at as far as weaknesses are concerned on the San Francisco defense?
I see what you did there. We saw this matchup last season in Philadelphia, and the Eagles offense struggled a little bit. It just does feel really different this time, right? I mean, the 49ers defense is trending much worse than their baseline last year, and Hurts has shown drastic improvement. There's more weapons for the Eagles, obviously, with A.J. Brown. What makes this interesting to me is that the thesis we had to start the year, and I know the NFC folks will kill me if an NFC team wins the Super Bowl, but effectively the NFC was garbage, right? That was our thesis. It seems to have come true, and that's why there's a lot of variance, I think, with this side of the matchup, because neither team's played a great schedule. I mean, the Eagles have played a bottom 6 schedule of opposing defenses. The 49ers have played a bottom 5 schedule of opposing offenses. So something has to give here. We obviously think both those units are very good, but they just haven't been tested that many times this season, and so it just allows for a little bit of a wider net of incomes, or of outcomes, rather. So my belief is, to your point, the Eagles are going to come out and pass more than people think here. The Eagles are very efficient running it, right? The most efficient, but it doesn't really make them a running team. They pass frequently. And I think the Eagles are obviously well-studied, and they're very analytical, and they understand the 49ers do a great job stopping the run. This isn't going to be the Giants of last week that gave up 3.2 yards before first contact the first 3 quarters on all rushes. So I think in those situations, we've seen the Eagles come out and pass the ball. I mean, any team that they've played this season that has a top 10 run defense, their game plan and script has been 69% pass in the first half. And I think that's kind of where this cat and mouse game comes in. D'Amico Ryan should expect pass, right? He's smart enough to know he has a pass funnel defense. Teams throw more, and it's pretty evident. And the formula to slowing Jalen Hurts and the Eagles' offense down is playing gobs of zone and not blitzing. And listen, Wink is a tough guy to get home to. He's not overly willing to take ideas and suggestions, and I think we thought he'd be smart and use his Week 18 game plan that he used right against the Eagles. He didn't. He went back to man coverage with high rates of blitz, and the game was over by halftime because of it.
Game was actually over by the end of the first quarter. Don't give the Giants too much credit.
I think the one thing here is, the 49ers play zone at a top 5 rate, and that's something the Eagles haven't faced recently. 5 of the last 6 games, opposing defenses played zone at a bottom 7 rate. The last 12 games the Eagles have played, only 2 of those defenses rank above average in zone usage, and in those 2 games, Hurts' productions fell off a cliff. So if you look full season, Hurts' EPA increases by a rate of positive 0.29 against man coverage compared to zone. Since week 10, The only positive EPA game Hurts has had versus a defense playing zone was unfortunately against us, Todd, where the decimated Titans secondary and A.J. Brown's revenge game just went absolutely ham. And
it's pretty much the
the
beginning of the end of the Titans season, by the way. So thanks to the Titans for that. You fire your general manager, you completely crater and go from there. So
that's right.
My God. All right. I'm going to go on a tangent, so I'm going to let you keep going.
Yeah, everything just seems worse for Hurts' production against zone and some of its processing speed, right? And you kind of see that in some of the lesser metrics. Sack and third down conversion rates dip against zone. So sack rate increases 5%, third down conversion rate dips 15% against zone coverage. It's also far easier to stop mobile quarterbacks from running if you're playing zone, right? I mean, DBs have an eye on the quarterback rather than their back being turned. And that's something I think to look for in this one. Hurts did have 82 rushing yards on 10 carries with a rushing touchdown in the first matchup when they played each other last year. 49ers haven't played many running quarterbacks this season, right? You have Kyler in your own division, but Kyler didn't play in either of those matchups. You had the entire offseason in a really, really sloppy track to stop Fields week 1. Stidham, Geno, and Dak all exceeded their rushing totals. I know we talked off air. Mariota went for 50 in a rushing touchdown, and I believe that was the week 6 matchup, but there was some scheduling quirks there. I think if the Eagles are successful here, they're coming out, they're throwing. The positive here is we talk about the 49ers pass rush all the time, but you got one of the league's best offensive lines, so you should be able to negate that a little bit more than an average offensive line, and that should allow Hurts to have more time to process and throw the ball and take advantage of some areas the Cowboys weren't able to do that, because that was the question we had. Could Gallup and T.Y. Hilton be good enough to attack down the field? And they weren't routinely good enough. And the times they were, Dak's vision just seemed to have evaded him. So I think when the Eagles are going to throw here, coming out with play action would be pretty damn smart. Metrically, this was surprising to me. Play actions worked better against zone defenses than man across the board in the league this season. And part of the defensive collapse through the air late in the season for the 49ers is because they've struggled to defend play action passes on early downs. And that's against far worse quarterbacks than Hurts, right? I mean, you look at those passing quarterbacks towards the end of the season, not very good. And again, the Eagles are very analytical and smart within their approach, and Jalen threw with play action on 47% of his first half passes last week against the Giants. So I would think that that's going to be deployed again here. Target the left side of this 49ers defense. Again, just Dak was missing open receivers. He was imploding a lot. There was plenty of opportunity deep to the left side of the field, and I know Fred Warner you're going to play that highlight probably as long as he's in this league and on his way to the Hall of Fame, where he's, sitting on the line of scrimmage and he immediately turns his back and sprints down the right seam and somehow is in coverage against CeeDee Lamb. And you're like, that was great. And it was. But all of a sudden you just look left and T.Y. Hilton's just streaking wide open left deep for a touchdown. So, there are opportunities here to be had against this 49ers defense, but just very much cat and mouse. And ultimately, Todd, I think we have another battle in this game. Guys I respect came out, laid the Eagles money line minus 120 or better, and now the conversations I'm having as we, lead up to this game Thursday morning is we would be quite interested in the 49ers if it got to 3. And we've kind of seen that throughout the week, right? A few times 3 has popped. It just did not last long at Heritage, did not last long at DK. So I kind of get the vibe, unless someone comes in with, limits increasing that I have not spoken to or heard about, this feels kind of like the right number here at 2.5. Just, again, my information matches what the market's been doing, right? I mean, just Heritage went to 3, it just did not last long. DK went to 3, did not last long. So I think we're going to have a little bit of a battle here on this side again.
I've been surprised, honestly, to see the overwhelming public sentiment for Philadelphia, because we know the 49ers have kind of been the public darling. People have talked about them at great lengths. But the books I've spoken to are expecting, not necessarily moving to 3 like you indicated there, but about a 65-35 split in terms of where the betting public is going to come down on this game. And I think so much of that hinges off of what we saw last week. And the 49ers look pretty pedestrian. And what I'll describe as a workmanlike win against the Dallas Cowboys. Philadelphia in a primetime audience Saturday night obviously look like gangbusters, but it's one of those things, buyer beware, that we kind of said about the Giants. Hey, look, how much can you take away from the Giants when you dominate the Minnesota Vikings? Did it have more to do with the team that advanced or the team that got beaten down? And I think we'll see this on full display. But there's no doubt, as far as the NFC, these are the two best teams in the conference, and I'm thrilled that we're going to get to see this as a chess match that'll continue to develop come Sunday afternoon.
That conversation is interesting because, bet percentages are very much misleading, especially when you don't know the price points in which they've come at, and we're not the bet percentage podcast for you. Like there's plenty of other guys doing that junk out there. But I think this time of year, the public really has their say in the NFL market. And getting an idea of where that action's coming into can be very helpful in terms of pricing, in terms of market entry. And so, while we, again, aren't the bet percentage podcast, I do think it is at least smart to know, based upon its importance this time of year where, books are certainly catering to the public, knowing how many bets are coming in on these games, knowing they don't have a slew of other games to make up their handle. And I think that, certainly can help you in terms of your market entry at times.
Yeah, it's a tool. It shouldn't be the basis or justification for making an investment in the sports market, whether you're a $10 bettor or playing significantly more. When you're talking about bet volumes in a game of this magnitude, much more substantial than if you were looking at the college basketball slate tonight, trying to figure out that 82% of the public was betting Monmouth against UNC Wilmington, where there may be 7 bets taken at a couple of these establishments.
Yeah. So I think also like figuring out how to navigate the 49ers if that's your side, right? Like, because the easy thing is when there's 2 games, like, oh, this is the game in the teaser window, right? Like we're teasing the 49ers. And the reality is you kind of want to be timing this correctly because you might have a chance at getting 3, right? The last thing you want to do is have your teaser going through the 3 and the 7, and all of a sudden it gets there naturally on the 3. Right, so that teaser is no longer advantageous. So, whereas if you decided to get confirmation that the 49ers are the side, where's that move actually going to? 2, 1.5, where your teaser window is then playable. So, I think, again, just kind of speaking to this, the market entry is very important. And so knowing who's betting what, how heavy they're betting what, makes a lot of sense when you're trying to navigate the market, specifically around the 3.
Well, who's betting what is why we lean on you when it comes to who may or may not be available in any given game. We go to people a lot smarter than ourselves. And for that, we bring in Deepak Shona, who's been with us all season long. You can follow Deepak on Twitter at SportMDAnalysis.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
All right, thanks guys. Now, we have some big names on this injury report. None, of course, is bigger than Patrick Mahomes. Dealing with a high ankle sprain he sustained last week during the game. Of course, he was able to play through, but looked a little hobbled. My expectation is that this week, we continue to see some limitations for Mahomes, especially when he's moving outside the pocket. Straight line movement should be reasonably well tolerated, but changing direction and accelerating will probably be the most affected abilities with this injury. I think that'll overall limit his rushing threat when he gets outside the pocket when the play breaks down. For reference with this injury, even mild versions usually cost running backs and wide receivers about 2 weeks, and many have a performance dip even upon their short-term return. Now, last weekend, Mahomes said he had some difficulty planting off that leg to throw. I'd expect that to be much improved by Sunday. We'll probably see him move reasonably well within the pocket, and adding that to his ability to throw from different arm angles leads me to not really expect much limitation on the passing game. Now, unfortunately, there is a real re-injury risk here as well. It's not highly likely, but we should keep in mind that a bad hit or someone landing on the ankle forcefully could definitely make this worse. Overall, I was a little surprised to see the Chiefs open the week as a favorite, despite this pretty real injury to Mahomes. And then we have his teammate, Mecole Hardman. He's been out since mid-season, reportedly with a pelvis injury. Hard to know exactly what his diagnosis is, but most common would be essentially a contusion or a deep bruise. And if that's the case, the fact that he did make it out there for a limited practice Wednesday would slightly lean me towards him playing in some capacity this weekend, though probably not immediately full strength. And then on the other side of the ball, also on offense, left tackle Jonah Williams for the Bengals. He dislocated his kneecap a little less than 2 weeks ago, didn't get on the practice field Wednesday, and at this point I'd lean towards him not playing this Sunday. There should be some optimism about his status for the Super Bowl if they make it that far, because return timeline is usually about 3 to 4 weeks, and that's actually what we saw from Patrick Mahomes a few years back. And then his teammate on the offensive line, right guard Alex Kappa. He's battling a nagging ankle, and after missing practice Wednesday, the chances that Kappa gets out there are not looking great. He's reportedly making progress, and he was seen without a protective boot on for the first time in a while, but this is similarly an injury I'd be optimistic about by the Super Bowl, just not by this weekend. And then on the other side of the bracket, Christian McCaffrey for the Niners didn't practice Wednesday, listed as questionable with a calf injury. They're calling it a contusion, which actually overall is relatively good news. This is the type of injury that does cause some pain, but it isn't commonly re-aggravated in practice or games. That, plus the fact that McCaffrey was already able to play through it during the last game, suggests that overall we probably won't notice a huge difference on his play on Sunday. And then Jalen Hurts, obviously last but not least. He's now 6 weeks removed from an SC joint sprain to his throwing shoulder. They're saying he's not 100% yet, but at this point, we wouldn't really expect to see any noticeable impact on his passing, and last week's performance did nothing but inspire confidence there. Where you ordinarily may have seen a difference is in play selection, specifically because a bad hit during a running play would carry an increased risk of re-aggravating his shoulder. But with that being said, with just 2 games left in the postseason, it would be pretty shocking to see them hold anything back right now. Overall, good news for Eagles fans that Hurts should look pretty similar to the regular season version we saw pre-injury. And that's all I have for now. I'll turn it back to y'all.
Thanks to Deepak, as always, for his fascinating look at all things medical and how that'll impact some of the marquee players. Of course, he led with Patrick Mahomes' Payne, which provides a nice segue for us to get into that game. But we talked about Christian McCaffrey, and Deepak sounds optimistic about the kind of workload that he'll take on and try and figure out how impactful he'll be out there. I mean, this is the time of year you tell me all the time, rub some dirt on it, get out there, and empty the tank, regardless of what you've been dealing with leading up to these contests.
The reason we have Deepak on this podcast is because I don't have to pretend like I went to Stanford or Harvard and operated on guys. So I'll trust Deepak with his assessment of CMC there.
Yeah, his academic pedigree leaves nothing to be desired there when you're talking about some of the most prestigious schools being on your resume. Puts both of us to shame. And little to say, I mean, I may have taken a sports physiology class along the way and probably retained about 3%. But had I known I would have needed that for this profession, probably would have spent a little bit more time there and studying weather patterns. But I digress. We do have one other game to get to. And of course, if we're looking at the NFC as being the JV, sorry, Eagles and 49ers fans, this is the varsity game Sunday afternoon with two elite quarterbacks. I know how to take shots. Come on, it was too easy. And I want my mentions to fill up with all sorts of nonsense and banner when the NFC inevitably wins the Lombardi Trophy in a couple short weeks. The Kansas City Chiefs.
Did you just admit to whoring out for likes and?
No, I try and elicit vitriol whenever I can to try and create some of that back and forth as we do around these parts. The Kansas City Chiefs, 1-point favorites against the Cincinnati Bengals. Total on this game, 47.5, depending on where you choose to do your shopping. Obviously, when you look at where this market opened, 3 was pretty much the consensus for the couple of shops that opened early with the Kansas City Chiefs a favorite. Well, which was interesting, though, Payne, was the total. Some books as high as 51, others at 49. They immediately saw one-way traffic on those particular contests. So I guess before we get into the X and O's, we try and speculate on how Patrick Mahomes will go about leading this offense, we should talk about the number and some of the psychology and market movement that we've seen for the 72 to 96 hours that it's been widely available.
Yeah, it's very much playing doctor, something we don't necessarily love doing. In terms of the number, right, like, this is a really interesting discussion because, and it's probably the most interesting of this entire game, but like the look ahead of this was Chiefs minus 5.5. And some guys thought it would be even as high as 6. Maybe you adjust to 3.5 or 4 based upon how well the Bengals looked against the Bills if Mahomes is healthy. But all of a sudden, it's Tuesday afternoon, and the Chiefs are plus 2.5. You have an 8-point adjustment from the initial look-ahead line of 5.5, and it's almost, and you're going through the 4 and the 3, and it's like this idea that, shit, you probably would have got to like 3.5. I mean, where are you going at that point? I mean, how hurt is Mahomes to be that drastic of a number? It didn't make any sense, right? It just did not feel right, and we finally saw the market sharpening a little bit on Tuesday, and then when Mahomes was out there on Wednesday jogging around a little bit, albeit, in a straight line, we've now gotten to Chiefs minus 1. Very similar situation with the total. I think the thought process was there was a couple shops, and this conversation's a little weird, but how the market's currently operating, there's a lot of openers that aren't actually on the screen, okay? And so the openers that weren't on the screen, Todd, to your point, was Chiefs minus 3, 51 on the total. By the time some of the shops actually came on the screen, you saw 49.5 as kind of the peak total, and we were well below the 3. I think once we kind of got down to 46, people said to themselves, Mahomes looks obviously much healthier. There isn't a threat of him missing now. He's at least jogging on a Wednesday, which is a great sign because he's got multiple days to continue to heal. And the last 3 matchups with these guys had totals of 51, 54.5, and 53. And so we're going to go over at 46, and that's why we're now back to 47.5. That's pretty much been the market on this game and why we've seen the movement, and it's all very much predicated on the Bengals playing their best game in the last 4 or 5 weeks in the Patrick Mahomes injury.
It's always so interesting because obviously it's just about getting numbers. And for those folks that were able to grab 3, even if it was for smaller limits with the Bengals on the open, and they were able to come back over the top, whether it was on a buy or grabbing 2.5, putting themselves in a very good position to try and earn off of those particular tickets. But when we look at the market where it's settled, obviously there's some X's and O's to be dissected here. When you go through some of the history between these teams, people talk about the Cincinnati Bengals' mastery of the Kansas City Chiefs. We know they beat them 3 times, calendar year 2022, but what I think a lot of people fail to incorporate into their handicap Payne is all 3 of those games were decided by a grand total of 3 points a contest. The Chiefs had leads in all of those games going into the 4th quarter, and it was the Bengals making some adjustments, finding a few wrinkles that were able to get them to the finish line. So it's not as though the Bengals have beaten them by 14-plus points in each of those contests. Joe Burrow throwing for 700 yards, and Patrick Mahomes and company walking back to the locker room after 60 minutes with their tail between their legs. But don't tell that to the Cincinnati Bengals, who have said some things that have caught the ire and the attention of the Kelsey brothers, specifically when they referred to Arrowhead as Burrowhead. Just what you want to do. Give Patrick Mahomes playing host to another AFC Championship for the 5th straight year a little bit more motivation. If the Chiefs are going to be successful, knowing some of Patrick Mahomes' limitations, what do you envision their best path should be offensively, trying to attack a Bengals defense that may not have a lot of household names or a lot of superstars, but they definitely get the most out of the sum of the parts?
Well, I think to your point here, like the Chiefs probably aren't going to change a ton. And you start to look after the injury, again, partly why we've gotten back to a semi-normal number, is Mahomes was decent throwing the ball. And I understand it was the Jacksonville Jaguars defense, and they are not very good against the pass. But even if you extrapolated Mahomes' EPA out after the injury, it would have been the 2nd best mark in the NFL. Full season, right? Only behind Patrick Mahomes' actual full season metric. So I think we're not getting a complete shell here of Patrick Mahomes. Now, Andy Reid claims that this injury isn't as bad as the 2019 high ankle sprain. The difference is this is his right ankle, and it was his left in 2019. And I honestly didn't feel the same way seeing how Mahomes played last week after the injury compared to how he played after the injury in week 1 and week 5 with that similar ankle injury that that Reid is calling it. I did feel very optimistic based upon how he looked on a Wednesday, though. I will say that. It feels like he's improved dramatically. Now, he's probably going to be a quarterback that's just sliding and moving around in the pocket and not actually taking off and running. Maybe that's, minimal at best. Maybe there's a leak on the interior of the line and he just takes off in like a straightforward manner, but I don't think he's rolling out and doing all those things. And I don't know. He's probably not going to be as accurate throwing down the field. That was the one area where post-injury, Mahomes was 2 for 5 on throws 15-plus yards downfield. So this feels like it could very much be a game played within a cocoon here. I know structurally Juju was running his mouth a little bit too about how fire the game plan was this week. We'll see what that actually looks like. I just, to your point, I don't think we're going to see a ton of changes for the Chiefs offense. They've built leads against the Bengals. They might be 0-3, but they've led by 18, 14, and 7. They've taken, a lead into every fourth quarter. They're averaging more than 2.8 points per drive against the Bengals. That's more than any offense has against that defense the last 2 seasons. They just have to get, away from some of the mistakes. The defense has to get a timely stop or two. Now, I'm not sure what Lou Anarumo has up his sleeve. I think that's really what's going to dictate what the Chiefs are going to do offensively. No one really knows what Lou's going to do because every game he's decided to throw the kitchen sink at Mahomes. If you look at coverage rates, they're constantly changing. He's making Mahomes, think differently snap to snap. He's making him think differently post-snap, pre-snap. He's just constantly changing the picture that Mahomes has, and it seems to have worked relatively well. Now, we know the Chiefs aren't as explosive as they were last year, and if Mahomes isn't a threat running the ball, you don't necessarily have to spy him, so that gives an advantage to Lou where he has that extra body now in the middle of the field where he can either double Kelsey or throw an extra defender into some coverage windows. If you look last week, the Jags blitzed Mahomes on 44% of dropbacks. It looks like that's a big number, and I think, it is full game, full season-wise, but it was really a ton in the first half and very little in the second half. Jacksonville chose to play coverage in the second half, and Mahomes just wasn't touched. That's now on film. So the Bengals don't blitz a ton. When they do, it's pretty exotic. You'll see Mike Hilton coming off the slot. But I do wonder if Lou kind of chooses to blitz more, knowing there's not a ton of vertical shots that the Chiefs can employ to kind of beat you. And you kind of want to make Mahomes slide right or slide left or throw off one foot with this injury. I think what we did see was, because the O-line knew where Mahomes was going to be last week after the injury, they had an easier time pass protecting, right? He was virtually in this little box between the hashes, 1 to 6 yards away from the line of scrimmage, and it really forced the Jaguars at that point. If they wanted to get pressure, they would have to go all around the edge and then back inwards, and it just didn't allow Mahomes to be pressured all that much. And so I think that's interesting here. We saw McKinnon's snap share just soar because he was helping in protection. So does Lou maybe blitz and force McKinnon to be a blocker rather than a force in the pass game, where we know he's been extremely efficient? We know the Bengals are certainly susceptible to running back passes, so maybe that's the way you combat McKinnon in the pass game, is blitz a little bit more, forcing him to stay in protection. That'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. We've seen the prop market, right? McKinnon opened 25.5 with his rush yards. It trickled to 26.5, and then all of a sudden, a service gave out over 27.5, and now we're as high as 33.5 Thursday morning. The expectation is just more McKinnon, I think, due to his ability to pass, protect, and catch the ball. This feels very much like a controlled offensive effort, right? If Mahomes isn't hitting explosives, if he's not as mobile, it's the short pass game. It's all hands on deck. There hasn't been a Chiefs receiver to exceed 100 yards in the last 11 games. And the Bengals do a really good job on tight ends. Make no bones about that. Lou does a very good job going out of his way to defend Kelsey. Whether it's, air yards, depth of target, they've done a really good job relative to Kelsey's baseline performance. And I think in general, since he's done a good job defending tight ends as well this season. So, I think it's very much predicated on taking what the Bengals give you. I believe we're going to sit here in this 0 to 12 box range where Patty Mahomes is going to have to be quick with his passes. He's going to have to be efficient. He's going to have to be really accurate within those windows. And I'm really intrigued to see what Andy Reid comes up with here. I think at this point it's a little bit different in philosophy, right? Like we devised a game plan against the Jaguars with a 100% healthy Patrick Mahomes.
Exactly.
Now we know what his limitations are, right? Like we can devise a game plan specific to the current state of Patrick Mahomes, and I think that helps him a little bit here, Todd.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to trust an offensive mind to put things together, it's going to be Mahomes collaborating with Andy Reid, Eric Bieniemy, going, hey, look, here are the things I can do. Here's how we need to devise a game plan and attack the Cincinnati Bengals defense. And kind of to put further context behind a lot of the storylines that you outlined right there, before the injury last week against the Jags, 6 of 12 pass attempts for Patrick Mahomes came outside the pocket. He had 3.1 seconds to throw. After the injury, 0 of his 18 pass attempts came outside the pocket, got rid of the ball substantially faster in 2.6 seconds. Why is that relevant? Because you saw something similar when Mahomes said he suffered the toe injury against the Cleveland Browns in the playoffs, and that he admitted was a bigger limitation. We'll see on Sunday if that's the case, but it was 7 of 23 passing with a 18.2 passer rating outside the pocket in those particular spots. So clearly Mahomes will know where he's going to be best served, and you're going to see Kansas City get the ball to their playmakers. The one thing I can say with a somewhat high level of confidence, and this may haunt me, is that the Cincinnati Bengals will not allow Travis Kelce to catch 14 passes like the Jacksonville Jaguars did. They were beaten up through the air in one of those 3 meetings against the Chiefs, but they've done a good job limiting in terms of his catch volume. Now, on the other side,
go out on a limb there. He's not going to have 14 catches again.
Every now and again, you got to live dangerously, Payne. Just like you
watch that.
Just like you and Jesse do on Cardboard Chat when he wants to bid $1 above and you're playing the Price is Right game. That's exactly how I'm operating right here.
That was just not supposed to be allowed. But
you're in his head.
Yeah.
You're taking up real estate in Jesse Craig's head right now. He's got to amend his game. So I figured you'd have been used to that. Given what you guys recorded earlier this week.
Let me ask you this question here, because you go back and watch, and it felt like the Jaguars were like, we're going to let Kelce get his and not let anybody else beat us. And he's just getting free release off the line, and I think you had a really good analogy off air.
Well, I sent out a tweet about that, and people get into the mentions, and they go, oh, well, you make it sound like it's a lot easier to slow him down. I'm going, well, I'm not saying slow him down completely, but not let him catch every single ball for 5 to 6 yards a pop. But it reminded me, and what I told you, of how the Knicks used to go about defending Michael Jordan throughout the 90s. You'd hear comments from Pat Riley. You hear comments from Van Gundy. We're going to let MJ get his, and we're going to take away everybody else. 6 championships later, using the Knicks as a glorified speed bump, hopefully they learn their lesson that approach isn't the best. Force anybody else but the superstar to beat you, and you tip your hat. There's a reason Bill Belichick does that and forces teams to play left-handed instead of going, you know what, we're going to allow you to beat us with your best weapon, and we're going to take away everybody else from the game plan. It makes my head explode.
Are you hoping for a little playoff run with the Knicks led by Jalen Brunson?
Oh, my God. No, I'm hoping for a playoff run, hoping that they can win one playoff series. But I've watched as much NBA basketball over the last 5 years as I used to watch in the course of a week, especially when it comes to the regular season. Don't get me started on that. When I look at my odds screen every morning, whether it's trying to monitor for NFL moves this time of year or some of the other sports, and all I get is pop-up ads about superstars that aren't available for the NBA with fictitious injuries. Play them less minutes, keep them out there on the floor, keep the fans happy. But I can go on a rant for days and days about that. Cincinnati Bengals on the other side of the ball. When you look at Joe Burrow and what he's done this year, clearly he's elevated Zach Taylor, and Zach Taylor should attribute all the coaching success he achieves this year and in subsequent seasons to Joe Burrow. But we've seen a change in philosophy from the Bengals from last year to this year. Last season, it was 6.6 plays per touchdown drive, was the fewest in the NFL. The average length of touchdown, 21.6 yards, longest in the league. This season, 15th most in the NFL at nearly 8 plays per touchdown drive. The average touchdown length trimmed substantially to 15.5 yards, puts them still in the upper third, but you've seen the Bengals take what opposing defenses will give them. T. Higgins hasn't been much of a factor over the last 5 weeks, had 100-yard performance, but has largely been kept in check. Jamar Chase, his fewest catches last week against Buffalo because he wasn't needed to be the high-volume receiver. We saw the impact he had early on in the game. If I'm sitting in this Kansas City defensive coaching room and I'm Steve Spagnuolo trying to figure out ways to slow down the Bengals, how am I going about trying to utilize some of the weaknesses the Bengals have? Can I attack that offensive line that performed well last week against Buffalo, but this is a different animal with Chris Jones coming right up the middle?
This is the side of the ball in either game that I'm most interested in. I think that will shock people. Like, I am amped for Bengals offense against Chiefs defense, Burrow versus Spags. And, we've talked about both units for multiple weeks now, slightly trending in opposite directions for both, right? I mean, since week 8, Kansas City's defense is above average in schedule adjusted efficiency, 4th in success rate allowed over that same time frame. We've seen the Bengals struggle in substantial stretches late in the season, whether it was the first half against the Buccaneers, the second half against New England, or either of the Ravens games in Week 18 or Wild Card Weekend. And I think you're kind of hinting at this sentiment where all of a sudden we go out and beat Buffalo and everything's completely forgotten about and changed, and they played at peak, and so suddenly everyone thinks that's going to be their performance here. I kind of want to go backwards for a minute, and then we can kind of build up. But if you think about what we said last week when we dove into the Bengals offense, we were pretty clear that we weren't as down on them in that specific matchup against the Bills, despite some of that noted regression, right? Relative to market, relative to the world is ending conversation last week because of the O-line injuries. I know we outlined the O-line injuries, but we thought the Bengals could combat them a little bit. We didn't think it would be as big of a problem as what people were saying or what the market was indicating. And sure enough, this combination of like Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott having a horrific game plan early, along with the snow sticking to the turf in Buffalo, it really helped negate what we thought and what everyone thought the Bengals' largest weakness was. And so, we said the game plan was simple. Joe Burrow is going to come out with his second fastest release time. He was going to get the ball out quick, and that would help the Bengals' injured offensive line. And sure enough, Burrow comes out throwing quick, something he's done all season, something the Bengals have been efficient doing, something the Bengals' defense was horrific defending. Bills are 25th in efficiency against passes thrown in under 2.5 seconds. And sure enough, McDermott and Frazier play off coverage the first 2 drives last week, similar to what they did in Week 17 before the game got canceled, and Cincinnati went up and down the field.
My God, you would have caught some of those balls against the defensive scheme and the free release those receivers had.
I mean, think about that for a second. You have the canceled game Week 17, Todd, where Burrow and that offense go up and down the field, score in the first drive. Buffalo comes back with a field goal. Burrow and the offense driving again, and then the injury happens. And then again this past week, the first 2 drives. And I think, you just kind of look at this in totality where, the Bills' defense was trending horrifically in pressure rate since Von Miller went down. And that became even more non-existent, especially when they couldn't get off the line of scrimmage because the surface was slick. So if you look at the drive chart for Cincy last week, the Bills played 0% man coverage on the opening drive. You have to play tighter coverage if your opponent wants to get the ball out quick to cover up that area of weakness, which is the O-line, right? Burrow ended up having a 100% passing success rate and a positive 0.98 EPA on the opening drive.
Is that good? Is 100% success rate good? Can you be higher than 100%?
Second drive, Bills only play man coverage on 10% of snaps. Burrow goes out, 60% success rate through the air, positive 0.54 EPA per pass, touchdown. Finally on the third drive, and Romo even says it on the broadcast, Bills are playing tighter coverage now, Jim. And from that point forward, the Bills' man coverage rate increased 4x, and Burrow's passing success rate the rest of the game dipped into the low 40% range. And why that's important, the Chiefs' defense plays the 7th highest rate of man coverage. They play tighter coverage, okay? Make Burrow read and react longer to find the open man, and that allows the Chiefs defense that's trending the opposite of the Bills in pressure rate to cause some havoc, to your point, right? Chris Jones up the middle. Since Week 13, the Chiefs are 6th in pressure rate. Joe Burrow's splits against man are not good. They're trending horrifically. Since Week 14, Burrow is the 3rd worst in EPA against man coverage. If you look on the season, not much better. We also know some of the too high shell concepts, which the Chiefs use at a very high rate as well, have given the Bengals some trouble. And so there's something called two-man, right? That's basically man coverage with your safeties playing the shell concept. And the Chiefs use that at the highest rate in the league. And wowzers, has Burrow been horrific against it. And so I just think, you look at the first match earlier this season, and the Bengals did a lot of their damage, after the catch. Yak. The Chiefs were horrific tackling in that game. They're just getting bulldozed by everybody. And the one thing that we've seen during this improvement defensively for the Chiefs, they're tackling better. I don't think Burrow and the Bengals offense is getting shut out here. That's not what I'm saying. But I truly believe this is going to look and feel a little different than the outside perception where, like, Joe Cool and the Bengals offense is just going to dominate this horrific Chiefs defense for the fourth straight time, because the metrics are indicating something wildly different. And I think there's a possibility where the inverse can happen here, okay? And it's certainly a little narrative-based, but last week, like, the Bengals O-line was being talked about poorly. They were going to be the reason Cincinnati failed, right? Much maligned. And you got that one-game bump. The game, the ball came out quickly. The weather helped. Now all of a sudden it's on film. The Chiefs saw how well you played. We have to respect you. We can see how you covered your weakness. And now for the Chiefs defense, it just feels different, right? Like, Patrick Mahomes bailed us out for years. It's time for us to return the favor, knowing he's not 100%. It just feels like we could see a slight tick down off the Bengals O-line performance last week, and we see a slight tick up defensively for the Chiefs here. I know it's a little narrative, but like you get that one-game boost where you're being just called out, and you are the absolute weakness. And now all of a sudden, it's a little different. The vibe has changed, I think, with these two units.
So you're telling me that the Bengals aren't going to accumulate 30 first downs, a Cincinnati playoff record, 172 rushing yards, the second most this season, and just allow one sack, tied for the fewest this season, for back-to-back consecutive weeks?
I would say no.
Hey.
That does have a I would say greater chance than Kelsey going over 14 receptions this week. But yes,
I was going to say,
I appreciate you jabbing back.
I was going to say, if we're trying to stack up probability side by side, I'd do that. Hey, one thing that blew me away when we talk about the Kansas City defense, we know how good Chris Jones has been, especially when he's healthy. Leads all defensive tackles in sacks, quarterback hits, and pressures this year. Still has 0 sacks on his resume in the postseason. You figure somewhere along the way, just by getting lucky or a quarterback tripping over an offensive lineman, that he's going to pick one up. So maybe this is the week he's able to get in the backfield and acquaint himself with one Joe Cool.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the pressure rates, there will eventually turn into sacks. I think if you're an offensive mind and you look at that defensive line, right, and I know Frank Clark seems to play a little bit better in the playoffs, but where are you allocating your resources? Where are you scheming offensively that you have to stop one guy? It's Chris Jones. So you're going to make a rookie beat you. You're going to make Frank Clark beat you. You're going to make Dunlap beat you. So certainly, Ted Karras being a full participant in practice on Wednesday was a huge step at center. You can't lose him, but I know he had the knee injury. He was battling through it in the Buffalo game, but he's going to play here. As Deepak alluded to, probably not looking likely for either Jonah or Kappa again. But if you're an offense and you don't want that offense to get stopped, your first focal point is how do we slow down Chris Jones?
It's the way to try and do it. Should be a fascinating game. Obviously, the Bengals, a ton of confidence. The Chiefs would love to get that monkey off their back. And it is a new calendar year. 0-3 against the Bengals in 2022. We'll see if they can go 1-0 in 2023. One final takeaway for me on this game, Payne. I love sometimes the irrational confidence that you get from elite-level athletes. And there's no player that's been more outspoken this week than Eli Apple. Just be quiet. Go out there, perform. I mean, when you're talking about a postseason coverage grade that's well below average, you probably don't want to give the Chiefs even more bulletin board material than they already have. Life advice there. I know he's not listening, but just something that drives me absolutely nuts in games of this magnitude.
Eli's mom might be. Why does the vibe on this game feel like the Chiefs are the underdog here?
Because the Bengals are allowing that to be the case. Instead of Joe Burrow, I give him credit. He says, we're never an underdog in a game, and I genuinely believe that. But the Bengals are going out, pounding their chest, and you don't ever want to say a team is overconfident in a game, but that's the feeling I get here, where the Chiefs have been quiet. They're going to go about their work. They can use Patrick Mahomes as a rallying cry, and maybe they do get that one-game bump where a defense that's been much maligned or the offensive line increases protection. But all that being said, if this number does get out to Kansas City -2.5, going to be tough to keep me off of Bengals as a potential teaser leg to try and figure out some of those dynamics. I think this game will be hotly contested from start to finish. And to be quite honest, wouldn't shock me if it was played in a similar way to when the Chiefs played the Bills earlier this year in a 24-20 type football contest.
I think both sides in this game have been teased. That's what pro bettors have been doing. And, where the Bengals opened, you got them on a teaser, and then all of a sudden, when the favorite flipped, the Chiefs came into that teaser window, and the same guys were taking the Chiefs in the teaser. So what's really interesting here is we look ahead lines all the time. I'm talking with my guys all the time, conferring with other bettors, and had Mahomes not been hurt and had this perception of the Bengals just drilling a Buffalo team that was leaking oil, had this game somehow opened 2.5, Chiefs minus 2.5 or 2 or whatever it was, and Mahomes was healthy, it's going to be one of our larger bets of the year.
We're not allowed nice things, by the way. That the NFL market doesn't allow us nice things in the playoffs.
And then all of a sudden Mahomes gets injured and it just becomes this navigation game. And, there's been some sharp money at 2.5 on the Chiefs yesterday, some sharp money on the Chiefs plus a half first half. And it was just predicated on it's impossible for the Chiefs to be a dog based upon Mahomes being even 75% healthy. And the video footage of that practice, even though it wasn't labor intensive, was certainly a positive sign for Patrick Mahomes' health. And your hope was that this game would be Patrick Mahomes at 100%, right? Because then you get the real outcome that we should have here. And let's see if Mahomes is able to kind of will his team to victory and everyone else steps up knowing that he's far less than 100%.
The nice part about all of this as well, with all of the information that you provide all of our listeners week in, week out, they don't have to go into the game with a pregame position. If they watch a couple series and go, you know what? This is exactly what the boys at Bet the Board told us was going to happen. Here's how it's going to unfold. We can get a better number at some point if Mahomes' mobility is a real concern. It's a nice part about having dynamic pricing and being able to find different entry points throughout the course of a game, especially in a standalone spot where everyone will be watching. You can follow Payne.
I think that's
go ahead.
I don't want to cut you off, but
No
I
problem.
think that was a really good point that you made there because listen, it's not widely available. There are some sharp guys on it, obviously, if you're dying for action and you're fiending for action, right? I understand the philosophy of the Bengals plus a half first half because the idea there is Andy Reid may have something concocted here that
you mean the Chiefs plus a half
I'm
first
sorry.
half, not the Bengals first
Yeah, what did
half,
I
right?
say? Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Did I say Bengals?
Yeah, you said Bengals plus a half first half.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, and that's a big confusion point because that's how we're trending now. If you're looking at the Chiefs, right, the first half angle there plus a half was probably an interesting way to attack that based upon what you're saying there is, Andy Reid's going to come up with a game plan that he hasn't employed the last 3 times they've gone against each other because we now know Mahomes' limitations a little bit. We know Lou Anarumo is much better in the second half, but to Deepak's point, the re-injury rate, right? When let's just have an honest conversation here. Like Mahomes is going to get shot up for this. He's probably.
How dare you make that kind of insinuation? That kind of stuff goes on in the NFL.
He's probably going to be a little bit better off early on in this game. The re-injury risk, right? You have the longer the game goes on, the re-injury risk heightens, and so I think that was necessarily the thought process there with the Chiefs' first half, plus, right, Lou Anarumo adjustments. We've talked about that. Substantially better defensively in the second half than in the first half. So I thought that was an interesting way to attack it, and by no means was it a large bet, but there were some guys, value betting the Chiefs their first half yesterday, plus that half.
No, it makes a ton of sense. This is the time of year where the markets are ultimately efficient. You try and figure out any little edge you can to try and maximize earning potential on games of this magnitude. I did a piss poor job earlier in the show as a host, but if you don't already know who we are, you can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And again, we encourage you every single week, if you haven't already done so, check out the Sports Card podcast that Payne does an outstanding job on. He gets to play host there and ask all of those hard-hitting questions called Cardboard Chat. It's him and Jesse Craig, a minority owner of PWCC Marketplace. These guys will talk about anything and everything related to the sports card industry. Entry points, an outstanding job that you guys did this week talking about folks that may want to take things on the road and get to some of the card shows that are out there this summer, especially as football winds down. So even if you're not into sports trading cards, these guys will open your eyes to a variety of possibilities. Encourage you guys to check that out. And also, assuming schedules hold next week, we'll have the first episode of the Stay Green podcast for 2023, a little NASCAR preview and hopefully a nice long shot ticket that you can put in your pocket for the entire season, a driver that we feel could be undervalued in the market when it comes to winning a championship. But before we get to all that stuff, Payne, last week I know a lot of our loyal listeners were disappointed. We didn't have a best bet on the show. Never had one on the site. And full disclosure, given the way my betting weekend went, we probably did them a favor by not eroding some of their bankroll. Have you seen anything actionable early on in the week, whether it's side, total, or maybe delving a little bit further into these markets?
Yeah. As the week kind of unfolded, and I'll be honest, I think if our listeners were smarter than us, and they certainly were last week, because I don't know what the hell happened. It was just, we talked about thinking, 53 was too high of a number in Jacksonville, Kansas City. Hopefully someone smartly bet that. We didn't. And, the second game there, I believe it was Eagles-Giants in that second game time slot was, once we got to 48.5, my insinuation was we'd see under money there come in. We did. It went to 47.5. That ended up winning as well. Hopefully someone was smart enough to bet that. I think we thought the Bengals at 6 was a little ridiculous based upon how Burrow could navigate some of those offensive line injuries that were being overpriced in the market. Didn't bet that. So it was we left a lot of meat out there. And then finally we came down to the San Francisco Cowboy game, and I believe you and I both liked the 49ers, although a group that we really respect liked the Cowboys, and that was a 7-figure position on game day, and why that ultimately went from 49ers -4, -15 on game day to, like soft 3.5.
On game day, so in about the 17 minutes before kickoff, it went there.
It was quite the move that I had heard was going to be coming. And so very much in line with the battle we told you was going to be transpiring in that game. And who knows, maybe if Tony Pollard doesn't go down or Dak doesn't throw up on himself all game, the result's a little bit different there. But we didn't want you to get involved in that battle. What I will say, and I will continue to say, is every single week we have a newsletter that goes out. And the newsletter prop bet last week was Zeke Elliott, longest rush under 11.5 yards. That cashed, about a day after that got sent out. The market was down to 9.5. So, a good prop bet there. Those have been rolling. If you want a little bit more action, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter. The link to that is in the description and preview of this podcast and all your platforms. I think we go back to a prop here. That's kind of how I'm thinking about this. Again, very much a battle in Eagles 49ers. There's going to be a battle their side total as well. This game here, Bengals Chiefs, is kind of like flowing here between pick and one, and it's doing some things to the first half. And, that one's not widely available, and all of a sudden. So let's kind of gravitate towards a prop that we like, that we have not bet yet, because obviously we're going to allow you guys to get to it first before we destroy this market. But I think when we look, and it goes back to our preview a little bit, let's look at Isaiah Pacheco under 50.5 rushing yards here. If you look, his snap share is declining each week the last 3 games. The staff clearly believes McKinnon is the far superior pass protector, and when you have a QB like Patrick Mahomes at less than 100%, he's going to be the guy in there. And based upon that injury last week, it's why McKinnon led all running backs in snap share during the divisional round. We've also, as I alluded to, saw a group go over McKinnon rush yards because of that increased snap share. The market's been beat up there, but that play very much is correlated to the Pacheco under. And you also look at Pacheco, I think there's a little bit of value in the price here, because the last 2 games he's gone for 159 rushing yards. 70 of that 159 is on 2 carries. Of that 159, 112 is after first contact. And the Bengals are actually number 2 in the NFL in yards per rush allowed after contact. So they do a good job getting you down once they make contact. So I think the Isaiah Pacheco under 50.5 rushing yards, it's widely available. It's certainly at our last sponsor that we had here for a sports book, still there as I look at it as we record. So I think that's a good way to look when you just look at the potential for McKinnon, seeing that larger snap share based upon his ability in pass protection, based on the correlation to a very sharp group looking McKinnon rush yards over, and then based upon the value of this because of what we've seen his production be on just 2 explosive runs in the last 2 games, and again, how the Bengals are bringing the ball carriers down once they actually make contact.
Hey, best way to try and win a prop is the player not actually being on the field. So let's hope we get a 65-35 split for McKinnon and Pacheco like we saw the game evolve last week. This is the time of year where prop limits are a little bit more aggressive. You can find some avenues as they get posted earlier and earlier. So want to encourage all the folks to, get down on that. And like you said, the newsletter has been absolutely rolling with some of those player props. So as menus increase, so do some of the opportunities to make a few dollars. And Payne, normally, everything we go through, we know the games we're going to cover, but sometimes during the course of the podcast, news breaks. You don't have a chance to try and put together your thoughts, and it's not hot take-ish, but we heard the Jets make an announcement on their new offensive coordinator. Nathaniel Hackett going to take over their play calling responsibilities and everything else. Maybe it's the first domino to fall if the Jets are going to go all in for a 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers, but do you think Nathaniel Hackett can restore his reputation going back to being a soldier since he failed so miserably as a general?
Not unless he's got Aaron Rodgers, I don't think. But that is exactly what that move would indicate, that they are making a play for Aaron Rodgers. And the AFC, my friend, could be getting a whole lot more interesting. If
could you imagine if that's
you
the
thought
case?
the AFC was tough this year, I think you are going to see the potential there. So Brady was obviously down here in South Beach looking at some school for the kids, and we know he's a Michigan man. It's a conversation for a different day, and I know the organization, the Dolphins organization, that is, has said Tua's our guy.
You can say what you want publicly.
And I think they're in win now mode, okay? Can you possibly give Tua a long-term extension knowing one hit and his career could be over again? Can you go into next year knowing that you've acquired all of this talent? You've made the trade for Bradley Chubb. You don't have a ton of assets. Your hope is that the secondary is going to be much healthier because it was riddled with injury. And if you get that secondary healthier, the conversation, and I hate doing this because it's so far away and it's maybe like a 25% chance of the combination happening, but they are very much kicking the tires on a Brady and Vic Fangio combination here in Miami. And so suddenly you have Mike McDaniel and Tom Brady with those weapons and Vic Fangio running your defense. The AFC could be an absolute force, and I think you'll also see maybe an uptick from the Jacksonville Jaguars. If they start the season how they finished it and they add a piece or two, the AFC is just an absolute... It's a path to go through. You're going to be looking back in years. No one's... obviously, Brady's the GOAT, right? But no one has the possibility of stacking championships in the AFC with how this thing is trending. And then Chargers are going to get someone more competent offensively than Joe Lombardi as well, right? So you probably uptick that. Let's say Sean Payton doesn't go to Carolina, he goes to Denver, right? The AFC is just going to be an absolute war next year.
Yeah, to contextualize the era we're in for the AFC, to your point, trying to establish dominance is going to be difficult, but don't tell that to the Kansas City Chiefs, who play host to their 5th straight AFC Championship game this weekend. Always fun to talk about the silly season in the NFL. Thankfully, it doesn't have to become our focal point just yet. 2 great games on Sunday, and what should be a barn burner regardless of who emerges from the semifinals to vie for the Lombardi Trophy in Glendale 2 weeks from now. Any final words?
Let me ask you a question,
by
the way.
Sure, fire away.
Yeah, the final words will be you. More important, Bengals or Chiefs? Who is this game more important to? This has nothing to do with the handicap. It's just very much a question because you're looking at the Bengals. I don't want to say this because Josh Allen's going to be healthier next year, but the sentiment is very much we're going to have to retool. This was kind of the current window, and it's closing a little bit. We know Burrow, Higgins, Chase, all on their rookie contracts. You got there last year. You couldn't get it done. This window of all of them being on the rookie contract simultaneously while being able to stack the defense with guys like Trey Hendrickson and, Simmons wants a deal. And right, feels very important for the Bengals to win this year.
So, I can make a case for both sides, honestly, because when you look at it in the Cincinnati Bengals, to your point, all of those checks are going to come due. To difference makers, they're going to have to figure out who they're going to continue to build around. Most likely it'll be Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and some of the other faces on that roster will gradually change. The Bengals got there last year, came up just a bit short, but raised that bar and the expectations that I don't think any of us really believed last year was even a possibility. So they deserve full marks there. But on the other side, if Kansas City were to drop this game at Arrowhead at home, you begin to go, all right, is this dynasty, or whatever we want to call it, I'm not sure that's the right term, that has just one Super Bowl to their credit, becoming the lovable losers, that one team has had their number, they can't get through, everything is broken the right way for them, so to speak, and they've earned it, albeit in very different manner this year than what they have in the past, that you have to win more than one championship if Patrick Mahomes is going to become the next heir apparent. So I think you can look at it, both ways. Meanwhile, on the flip side, when you're looking at the NFC, I'm not saying these teams are going to get here again, but I think both Philadelphia and San Francisco on some level are working with house money. There's not a ton of pressure, in my estimation, on either of those teams in the NFC because Jalen Hurts isn't getting a life-changing deal right away, and the 49ers continue to do it with smoke and mirrors at the quarterback position. The biggest question the 49ers are going to have to answer if they win this week, what does that quarterback battle look like going into camp with Trey Lance being their guy or Brock Purdy basically putting this team on their shoulders? So many interesting storylines, but I think in the AFC there's a lot more pressure on both those teams than what you're going to see in the early game with those two teams in the NFC.
Yeah, it's an interesting narrative around the Chiefs. I think you are probably right if you go to your 5th AFC title game and you only have one ring.
You start to become the Atlanta Braves, quite candidly.
Yeah, well, I mean,
on some level.
you have the Super Bowl. Mahomes is still young, and you're ahead of everyone else in terms of the restructuring of the contracts, right? Like you're getting the Patrick Mahomes that's hitting the cap that forced Tyreek Hill out of town effectively. All these other teams are kind of playing with that house money and don't have any of the accolades yet. And I think, right, like this week again, sadly, Mahomes goes to the Super Bowl and he's down 4 of his 5 offensive linemen against the Buccaneers. He's playing on one leg this week again. So it feels weird, to your point, right? The toe injury. Yeah, I think this is an interesting one. If the Chiefs somehow win it, boy, the ankle gate is going to be that's going to be part of this run, right? We're going to see him hobbling around out there, and the legend will grow a little bit more. But certainly, I think the Bengals have to start making some noise here because those contracts are all going to hit at once.
I figure an equipment manager or somebody on the staff at Arrowhead that when they cut that tape off Patrick Mahomes' ankle, should it be a win on Sunday, you'll have the leading bid when it hits the market.
See what we can do.
All right. Best of luck to all you, our loyal listeners. Can't thank you guys and girls enough for tuning in each and every week throughout the course of the NFL regular season. College football, you name it. The fun obviously doesn't stop. Cardboard Chat, it's a lot of evergreen content, some great information there. We're about to peel back the curtain on a brand new NASCAR season as well. Plenty of things to keep you going around the Bet the Board home offices. But most importantly, with an Isaiah Pacheco rushing yard total under come Sunday afternoon, hopefully we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.